Here we've got rostra and candle,
Caudal?
caudal, or anterior and posterior. Here we got the ventral and the dorsal.
Right.
Superior, inferior is internal, above and below parts within the brain.
And the near axis is
Yep.
horizontal, it doesn't change.
And the hemispheres are contralateral are opposites, where the ipsilateral is same hemispheres.
Right. So the sagittal plane would be this one. And that's the sagittal there, right?
And then
Yep.
the axial would be straight down.
Through here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, and then there's the horizontal, which is
Horizontal.
through this way, through the side.
Yep. Okay.
Down right there. That would be the horizontal plane. This one didn't come with like a bunch of dura mater on it or any of the really tough meninges.
Yeah.
So
There might be a little bit right there.
yeah, like around here. Determine that maybe right there. There could be some of the
The arachnoid.
just the slightest bit maybe.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
Here, right? Identifying the forebrain. And there's that line that goes right here that this is where your primary motor cortex was, right? Everything like that. It doesn't go all the way down. You see it's got the little there and there, but it doesn't go all the way through in a sheep brain.
Sulcus is the
Small grooves.
groove, and then
Right.
the gyri is all of the different
Right.
lumps. And so, yes, this over here between the cerebrum and the cerebellum is the transverse fissure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the primary functions would be
Of the cerebral cortex?
cerebral cortex.
It's just higher brain function, thought, action, and then outer portion of the cerebrum.
So-
This is the left,
Yeah.
and this is the right
Yes.
hemisphere.
And the longitudinal cerebral fissure divides the right and left hemispheres.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Frontal, the perineal, the occipital,
Occipital. Yeah.
and the temporal.
Nice.
Temporal right here. Yes, this is the temporal, right? This little, because it kind
Right.
a little one just on the bottom.
Think of where your temples are on you.
Yeah,
And that's where that would
they got
be.
the sheep's got a really small one, right?
Right. Then, looking for the optic chiasm.
Yep.
Which is that guy right there. You see where the optic nerve comes through, and then the eyes would be big
Yeah.
right here.
And then the optic chiasm is for the crossover of visual information from the eyes and the optic nerves.
Right.
And then these are the olfactory bulbs, which are very large on a sheep because smell is a good thing to have if you're a sheep.
Right, and that's
Primary sensory organ is the smell.
right here. So we have the cerebellum.
Which receives info from the sensory system, spinal cord, and regulates motor movement.
Right, we already did the pons. I'm gonna use this guy.
Connects upper and lower parts of the brain, message relay station between cortex and cerebellum.
Then we have the medulla.
Which regulates involuntary functions. Sensory and motor neurons from the forebrain and midbrain travel through the medulla, and it's a part of the brainstem which contains centers for the heart rate, blood pressure, and respiration.
Olfactory bulbs, olfactory tract, and the oculomotor nerve sticking out right here. And this one I think we decided is the trochlear nerve. And down here we have a very nice spinal accessory nerve. And there might be some other nerves sticking off right here, but they're too tiny to tell.
And that could be this
Hypoglossal
nerve.
is a little bit hairy, or the vagus nerve comes out over here.
Right. Little section right here. And the ventral root, you can see how there's a little discoloration right around here. like that, but
It's
without
hard
the
to
dyes that get put in, sometimes
Mhm.
it's hard to see the difference in there.
And the dorsal root of the spinal nerve brings sensory information from the periphery to the spinal cord.
Right.
And then the ventral root is the efferent.
It's efferent. It takes the motor impulses and action commands out to the periphery.
Yep.
So we have, that's the fourth ventricle. And there's just cutting a little bit of those little stringies in there, just so you can see in there.
And the function of the ventricles are open spaces in the brain, and they contain cerebral spinal fluid, which carries nutrients, waste, and regulates pressure of the nervous system.
Okay, superior colliculus.
Colliculus?
It's
Is that little thing that looks like a butt right there. Then the little bumps below it. That is the inferior colliculus.
And the function of the superior receives info from the retina and visual cortex involved in ability to track objects. And the inferior, the function for that is auditory functions, which is important for sheep.
See, it's that white stuff is the axons that connect the two hemispheres.
The corpus callosum?
Yep. So is that it right there, that white stuff?
Yeah, should be.
And the function of the corpus callosum is communication between hemispheres.
We're talking about starting there, going all the way, and it's this part right here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nice. So if we put it back together, that's the optic chiasm there.
Is,
Very, very cool.
So this right here is actually the pituitary gland, and you can kind of tell because there's still dura mater underneath it, and that's usually what gets ripped off when you get the sheep brains. So the limbic cortex is going to be in this area. It's going to be the surface of the limbic system. The limbic cortex function is that it's motivation, emotion, learning, and memory. The corpus callosum is this white area right here, and that functions for the communication between hemispheres. The fornix is,
Is it this?
it's the bottom portion
Right
right
here.
here. Yep.
And the function for that is that it carries signals from the hippocampus to other parts of the brain.
Yes. And the lateral ventricle has choroid plexus in it, which is kind of this little pinkish, squishy part.
That's why
And-
some pharmacological items do not pass through into your brain, and some do.
Yes. Optic chiasm we previously identified, there's part of it right there. The diencephalon, the thalamus, is right here. And the thalamus integrates information and relays it to appropriate regions for processing. The hypothalamus is below that, kind of in this area. And the function of that is biological timekeeping, regulation of body temperature, and regulation of homeostasis.
I'm just trying
That is the superior colliculus,
Yeah.
actually. So superior colliculus right here, and inferior colliculus that we
Mhm.
previously saw. The fourth ventricle is this area right here. You can see the cerebral aqueduct right in here.
This is the midbrain mesencephalon, right? So we have the superior colliculus here, the inferior colliculus here, and the superior receives the visual input. The inferior receives the auditory inputs, and then we have the cerebellum here, and then the tegmentum, which is right here. This lateral part through here before it comes into the spinal cord. And then we get to the metencephalon. So mesencephalon here, metencephalon here.
And the function of the tegmentum is involved in dopaminergic system of reward and pleasure.
This is where your addictive substances have the most input, and then this section here, when that happens, overstimulates, causing you your withdrawal symptoms. It's looking for that drug to come in, and it's not getting it. So that's how you get your withdrawal symptoms, is when this has received something that is overstimulating, I do believe. And then the arbor vitae here, it does look like a tree. It's amazingly delineated. It's quite fascinating.
And the function for that is that it brings sensory and motor information to and from the cerebellum.
Very nice.
The gray versus white matter.
So we have the gray matter, and then we have the white matter.
And so the
Okay.
branches are white matter, which is made up of nerve axons, and the darker tissue is gray matter, which is a collection of nerve cell bodies.
So these cell bodies originate here and then travel out and talk to each other. And pons here, the medulla oblongata, just like saying it here, and to the spinal cord attachment right there. And the foramen magnum would be right here in the skull, and this would be coming through the opening. So that's where the constriction would be here, separating the brain, the central nervous system, from the spinal cord, the peripheral nervous system.
And the function of the medulla oblongata, it helps regulate breathing, heart and blood vessel functions, digestion, sneezing, and swallowing.
All of those involuntary actions that you don't necessarily think about every moment of your day is controlled right there. Tracks that connect the cerebellum with other areas of the brain. So the pons here has nerve tracks that connect the cerebellum with other portions of the brain.
See, so the corpus callosum. Ooh, let me see this.
You don't have the gloves on.
It's kind of hard to tell with like it being split like that. It would be this part right here, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we have that, and then the quadrate nucleus would be right in the center, which would be this area right here. That little empty space.
Near the caudate.
Mm-hmm. And
The caudate nucleus is right next to that empty space.
right here.
Yeah, because the empty space would be a ventricle. That's your lateral part of your lateral ventricle, I do believe. The very front of it.
Yep.
The nucleus is actual
This right
brain
here.
matter.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the putamen
Putamen?
Putamen.
would be sorry.
Oh
would
no,
be
dude,
more
I don't speak Latin either.
on this side, correct? And then the globus pallidus, did I say that correctly?
I think
Yes.
so.
Would be more on the downside of this,
Inferior portion.
of the brain. And then the anterior
Commissure.
commissure would
Might be seen on that other piece.
yeah, it's kind of hard to see on this piece. Oh, there we go. So then the anterior commissure would be more on this end.
You want to get
A little further
kind of
back.
right about here.
That's kind of what it looks like, right to the base of where that
Mm-hmm.
the midbrain hits.
Okay. And now we're here.
And then before we move on to that, though, the function of the quadrate nucleus is that it plays important roles in various other non-motor functions, including procedural learning, associative learning, and inhibitory control of action. And the putamen regulates movements at various stages and influence various types of learning. And the globus pallidus regulates, it's the regulation of voluntary movement, which helps to regulate movements that occur on the subconscious level. see
Awesome.
this right here.
Yeah. So this is so this would be the hippocampus here.
And that's part of the limbic system, which regulates long-term memory and spatial navigation.
Right. So the hippocampus, and then the medial geniculate nucleus here.
And that relays between inferior colliculus and the auditory cortex.
And
And then the
lateral
lateral.
geniculate would be this right here, right? No.
Is
I think it'd
Right.
be this right here.
Gotcha, right there.
Hmm.
Okay,
And
I think.
that relays
I got it.
center in the thalamus for visual pathway and receives major sensory input from the retinas.
Yeah.
We have the lateral, and the lateral's up here, and then the medial, and then the hippocampus up there.
Nice. Very cool.